The dust of the trail clung to Daisy Lane's blue cotton dress as she stood at the crossroads, the afternoon sun beating down on her fair skin. 6 years had passed since she'd last laid eyes on the sprawling Double D ranch that loomed in the distance, its weathered fence posts and massive oak trees both welcoming and intimidating. Her heart hammered against her ribs as memories flooded back of laughter shared under starlit skies, of promises broken in the cold light of dawn, and of the day she fled with nothing but a carpetbag and shattered dreams. Colorado Territory, 1876. The world had changed since she'd left, and so had she. No longer the naive 19-year-old ranch hand's daughter with stars in her eyes. Daisy had returned a 25-year-old widow with calloused hands and a spine of steel forged in the fires of survival. She adjusted her worn leather satchel and took a deep breath. The ranch house stood proud against the backdrop of the Rocky Mountains, a two-story structure of solid timber and determination. Somewhere inside was Wade Daniels, the man whose heart she'd broken when she chose another path. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, taking the first step down the dusty path. A distant rumble of hooves made her pause, shielding her eyes against the glare of the setting sun. A lone rider approached, his silhouette familiar even after all these years. Wade Daniels sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders and the characteristic tilt of his hat unmistakable. He slowed his chestnut mare as he neared, and Daisy felt her throat constrict. He was older, his once boyish face now weathered by sun and hardship, a thick beard covering his jaw where only stubble had been before. But his eyes, those piercing blue eyes that had haunted her dreams, remained unchanged. He pulled his horse to a stop a few paces from her, dust settling around them in the heavy silence. "Wade," she managed, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own heartbeat. For a long moment, he said nothing, just studied her face as if memorizing every line, every change that time had etched there. Then he dismounted in one fluid motion, boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. "Daisy Lane," he said, his voice deeper than she remembered, rougher around the edges. "Never thought I'd see you back on this land." She swallowed hard. "I didn't think I'd ever return." "What changed your mind?" His question hung between them, weighted with unspoken history. "Everything," she answered truthfully. "I have nowhere else to go." Wade's expression softened just slightly, the hard line of his mouth relaxing. "My door never closed for you, Daisy. Not even when you shut it behind you." Those simple words nearly broke her. 6 years of hardship and heartache, and here he was, offering the very thing she'd been afraid to hope for a chance to come home. "I don't deserve your kindness," she whispered. Wade took the reins of his horse in one hand and gestured toward the ranch with the other. "Let's get you settled. We can talk about what's deserved and what's not over supper." The walk to the ranch house was silent, tension thick between them. Daisy noticed changes: new outbuildings, expanded corrals, a freshly painted barn. The Double D had prospered in her absence. "You've done well with the place," she offered, trying to bridge the chasm of years. Wade nodded. "Had to. After Pa passed, it was just me and a mountain of debt. Nearly lost it all in '72. Guilt washed over her. She'd heard about old Mr. Daniels' death 2 years after she'd left. By then, she'd been trapped in a marriage that had quickly soured, unable to even send condolences. "I'm sorry about your father. He was a good man." "That he was." Wade's voice was gruff with emotion as they approached the house. "He asked about you near the end." Daisy's step faltered. "He did. Wanted to know if I'd heard from you. If you were happy." Wade glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "I told him you must be, since you never wrote." The words stung, as they were meant to. "It wasn't that simple, Wade. It never is with you, Daisy." He tied his horse to the hitching post and climbed the porch steps, holding the door open for her. "Come on in." The interior of the ranch house was both familiar and strange. The layout was the same, but the furnishings had changed. Gone were Mrs. Daniels' floral curtains and patchwork quilts, replaced by practical, masculine touches: leather-bound books, a gun rack by the door, a simple oak table where the ornate one had once stood. "You're alone here?" she asked, setting her bag down near the door. Wade removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "Not entirely. Got a couple of hands who bunk in the old cabin. Mrs. Whitaker comes by 3 times a week to cook and clean." Otherwise, it's just me and the cattle. Daisy nodded, feeling out of place in what had once been like a second home to her. I should explain why I've come back. You should, Wade agreed, moving to pump water into a kettle. But first, you look like you could use some coffee and a hot meal. When's the last time you ate? The simple kindness nearly undid her. Yesterday, she admitted. Wade frowned, setting the kettle on the stove and striking a match to light the fire beneath it. Sit down before you fall down. There's stew left from midday. Daisy sank into a chair, watching as Wade moved efficiently around the kitchen, spooning stew into a bowl and cutting thick slices of bread. He'd always been self-sufficient, even as a young man. But now there was a quiet confidence to his movements, a maturity that suited him. Thank you, she said when he placed the food before her. He sat across from her, arms folded across his broad chest as she ate. She could feel his eyes on her, assessing, questioning. My husband died, she said between mouthfuls, deciding to start with the most straightforward truth. 3 months ago, typhoid took him. Wade's expression remained neutral. I'm sorry for your loss. Daisy set down her spoon, meeting his gaze directly. Don't be. Thomas Lane was not the man I thought I was marrying. She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. He was cruel, Wade, in ways I never imagined a person could be. Wade's jaw tightened, a flash of anger crossing his features before he masked it. Did he hurt you? Yes, she answered simply. But that's in the past now. After he died, I discovered he gambled away everything we had. The house, the business, even my mother's jewelry. I had nothing left. So you came back here. It wasn't a question. I tried other options first, Daisy explained. My parents are gone. Thomas's family blamed me for his death. I worked in a millinery shop in Denver for a time, but... She trailed off, unwilling to explain how the owner's wandering hands had forced her to flee that situation as well. But here you are. Wade finished for her, getting up to pour coffee as the kettle whistled. Here I am, she agreed softly. I know I have no right to ask for your help, not after the way I left. But I didn't know where else to turn. Wade handed her a steaming mug, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact sent a familiar jolt through her, awakening feelings she'd thought long buried. What exactly are you asking for, Daisy? His voice was low, guarded. She took a sip of coffee to steady herself. Work, if you have it. A place to stay until I can get back on my feet. I can cook, clean, mend whatever you need done. Wade's expression softened slightly. You were never meant for servant's work. I'm meant for honest work, and I'm not too proud to do whatever's necessary. She straightened her shoulders. I've changed, Wade. I'm not the foolish girl who ran off with the first smooth-talking salesman who promised her the world. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No, I don't suppose you are. He studied her for a long moment. You can stay. Mrs. Whitaker could use the help, and we're heading into calving season. Extra hands are always welcome. Relief washed over her. Thank you. I won't let you down. See that you don't. He stood, taking his hat from the hook by the door. I need to check the north pasture before dark. Your old room's still there, upstairs on the left. Sheets are in the hallway cupboard. Daisy nodded, unexpected emotion tightening her throat. Her old room, the one she'd used during the summers she'd spent helping Mrs. Daniels while her own parents worked the neighboring farm. Before everything changed, Wade paused at the door, his back to her. Why did you really leave, Daisy? The truth, this time. The question caught her off guard, though she should have expected it. I was afraid, she admitted. Of what? He turned slightly, his profile silhouetted against the fading light from the window. Of this. She gestured around the room. Of the life we talked about. Of failing you. Of not being enough. She swallowed hard. I convinced myself that Thomas offered a better future, excitement, travel, fine things. I was wrong. Wade nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Get some rest. We start at dawn. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Daisy sat alone in the gathering darkness, wondering if she'd made yet another mistake in returning to the place and the man she'd once fled. The next morning came early, the first gray light of dawn filtering through the worn curtains of her old room. Daisy had slept fitfully, haunted by memories both sweet and bitter. She dressed quickly in her simplest dress, pinning her light brown hair into a practical bun before making her way downstairs. To her surprise, Wade was already in the kitchen, frying bacon and brewing coffee. He glanced up when she entered, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Morning," he said, nodding toward the stove. "Help yourself." Daisy poured a cup of coffee, trying to ignore the awkward tension between them. "What would you like me to do today?" Wade flipped the bacon in the pan. "Mrs. Whitaker will be by around 9. She'll show you what needs doing in the house. After that, if you're up to it, we could use help with the calves in the south pasture." "I can do that," Daisy said, her confidence growing. Farm work she understood. It was the complicated emotions that terrified her. They ate in relative silence, the only sounds the scrape of forks against plates and the occasional whinny from the horses outside. When they finished, Wade stood and collected his hat. "I'll be back midday," he said, pausing at the door. "Daisy," he hesitated, as if weighing his words. "It's good to have you back, despite everything." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her to stare after him with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Mrs. Whitaker arrived precisely at 9, a stout, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She seemed surprised but not displeased to find Daisy in the kitchen, already elbow-deep in dishwater. "So you're the girl," she said, setting down her basket of supplies. "Wade mentioned you'd be staying a while." "If that's all right," Daisy said, suddenly uncertain of her welcome. Mrs. Whitaker waved a dismissive hand. "More than all right. This place needs a woman's touch, and I'm getting too old to keep up with it all." She eyed Daisy appraisingly. "He never said how pretty you are, though." Daisy felt her cheeks warm. "We're old friends." Mrs. Whitaker hummed skeptically. "Friends don't look at each other the way that man looks at you when you're not watching." Daisy nearly dropped the plate she was drying. "He's just being kind, offering me a place to stay." Wade Daniels is a lot of things, hard-working, honest, stubborn as the day is long, but he's not a man who offers charity without good reason. Mrs. Whitaker began unpacking her basket. "Now, let me show you what needs doing. The sooner we finish in here, the sooner you can help with those calves." The morning passed in a flurry of activity. Daisy cleaned, helped prepare food for the next few days, and listened as Mrs. Whitaker filled her in on the ranch's operations. She learned that Wade had expanded considerably, buying adjacent land when neighbors gave up and moved on. The Double D now ran over 500 head of cattle and employed 4 full-time hands, with more coming on during Roundup. "He's done well for himself," Mrs. Whitaker said, rolling out dough for an apple pie. "Built this place into something his father would be proud of. But he's alone too much, if you ask me. Man needs more than cattle and horses for company." Daisy remained silent, focusing on peeling apples. What could she say? She'd given up any right to Wade's company when she'd walked away. By midday, the house was spotless, bread was baking, and 2 pies sat cooling on the windowsill. Mrs. Whitaker nodded in satisfaction. "You'll do," she announced. "I'll leave the afternoon meal for you to serve. The men usually come in around 1. Now, I must be going. My grandson's arriving on the afternoon stage." She gathered her things, pausing at the door. "Wade's been waiting a long time, you know. Don't make him wait much longer." Before Daisy could ask what she meant, the older woman was gone, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the smell of fresh baked bread. She was setting the table when the door swung open, and Wade entered, followed by 2 ranch hands. All 3 men stopped short at the sight of her, and Daisy suddenly felt self-conscious in her worn dress and flour-dusted apron. "Gentlemen," Wade said, removing his hat. "This is Daisy Lane. She'll be helping around the ranch. Daisy, these are my hands, Hank Johnson and Eduardo Vasquez." The men nodded politely, though Daisy didn't miss the curious glances they exchanged. Word traveled fast in ranch country, and she suspected they knew exactly who she was, the girl who'd broken Wade Daniels' heart. "Pleasure to meet you, Mississippi Lane," Hank said, a middle-aged man with weather-beaten features. "Senora," Eduardo added with a slight bow. He was younger, maybe in his 20s, with quick dark eyes and a friendly smile. "I've made beef stew and fresh bread," Daisy said, gesturing toward the stove. "Please sit down." The men needed no further invitation, settling at the table while Daisy served the meal. She noticed Wade watching her, a puzzled expression on his face, as if he couldn't quite reconcile this capable woman with the girl he'd once known. The conversation over lunch was mostly about ranch business cattle that needed moving, a section of fence that required repair, plans for the upcoming spring roundup. Daisy listened, asking occasional questions that made the men look at her with newfound respect. Her years as a rancher's daughter hadn't been wasted, after all. When the meal was finished, Wade turned to her. "If you're still interested in helping with the calves, we could use an extra pair of hands." Daisy nodded eagerly. "I'll just change into something more practical." 20 minutes later, she emerged from the house wearing the only pair of trousers she owned, purchased out of necessity during her brief time in Denver, and a faded work shirt that had once belonged to her father. Her hair was braided and pinned securely under a wide-brimmed hat. Wade's eyebrows shot up when he saw her, but he made no comment, simply handing her the reins to a gentle-looking bay mare. "This is Penny. She's steady and won't give you any trouble." Daisy stroked the horse's velvet nose, breathing in the familiar scent of hay and leather. "She's beautiful. Been saving her for the right rider," Wade said quietly, then turned away to mount his own horse before she could respond. The ride to the south pasture took them through rolling grassland dotted with spring wildflowers. Despite everything, Daisy felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was home: the endless sky, the distant mountains, the smell of sage and pine on the breeze. How could she have ever left this behind? They found the cattle scattered along a creek, several new calves wobbling on spindly legs beside their mothers. Wade dismounted and tied his horse to a scrub oak, then turned to help Daisy down. His hands at her waist were strong and sure, and for a brief moment, they stood close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, could feel the warmth of his breath on her cheek. "Thank you," she murmured, stepping back before the moment could become something more. Wade cleared his throat. "The hands will round up the herd for branding tomorrow. Today we just need to check the new calves, make sure they're healthy." They worked together in comfortable silence, moving from cow to cow, examining the calves for any signs of distress or illness. Daisy's presence seemed to calm the nervous mothers, allowing Wade to check the calves more thoroughly than he might have alone. "You've still got the touch," he observed after watching her soothe a particularly skittish heifer. "Always did have a way with animals. They're easier to understand than people sometimes," Daisy replied, stroking the cow's flank. "More honest about what they want." Wade's gaze lingered on her face. "And what do you want, Daisy? Really want?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. She looked away, focusing on the calf nursing contentedly at its mother's side. "Peace," she finally answered. "Safety. A chance to make amends for my mistakes. Is that all?" His voice was soft, almost hopeful. Daisy met his eyes then, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. "No, but I've no right to want more, not after what I did." Wade took a step toward her, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought he might reach for her. Instead, he gestured toward a calf lying apart from the others. "That one looks like it might need help." The spell broken, they returned to their task, but something had shifted between them. A door cracked open just enough to let in a sliver of light. The rest of the afternoon passed in a rhythm of work that felt both new and familiar. By the time they headed back to the ranch, the sun was low in the western sky, painting the plains in shades of gold and amber. Daisy's muscles ached pleasantly from the unaccustomed activity, and her mind felt clearer than it had in years. As they approached the ranch, Wade suddenly reined in his horse. "Hold up," he said, his tone sharp. Daisy pulled Penny to a stop beside him. "What is it?" Wade nodded toward the ranch house, where an unfamiliar buckboard was parked in front. "Visitors." Something in his voice made Daisy tense. "Anyone you recognize?" "Unfortunately." His jaw tightened. "That's Jacob Thornton's rig. Banker from town. Been trying to buy sections of my land for months now." "Why would he want your land?" Daisy asked. Wade's expression darkened. "Railroads coming through. They need right-of-way, and Thornton's been buying up property along the proposed route, offering pennies on the dollar to folks who don't know any better. And he wants the double D? Parts of it." Wade urged his horse forward. "Specifically, the eastern section that runs along Miller's Creek. It's the flattest route through these parts." They rode the rest of the way in silence, but Daisy could feel the tension radiating from Wade. When they reached the yard, he dismounted quickly, offering her a hand down before striding toward the house. A portly man in an expensive suit stood on the porch, examining a cigar. He looked up as they approached, his small eyes calculating beneath bushy brows. "Daniels," he said by way of greeting, his gaze sliding curiously to Daisy. "Didn't expect to find you out at this hour." "It's my ranch, Thornton. I come and go as I please." Wade's tone was cool but civil. "What brings you out here?" Thornton puffed on his cigar, the smoke wreathing his florid face. "Same business as before. Railroads finalized their plans. They're offering $20 an acre for that eastern parcel, more than fair, considering the quality of the grazing there." Wade crossed his arms. "And I'll give you the same answer as before. The Double D isn't for sale, not a single acre of it. Don't be a fool, Daniels. This is progress we're talking about. The railroad means prosperity for everyone in the territory." Thornton's gaze shifted to Daisy again. "And who might this lovely lady be?" Before Wade could answer, Daisy stepped forward. "Daisy Lane," she said, extending her hand. "I'm helping Mr. Daniels with the ranch." Thornton took her hand, holding it a moment longer than necessary. "A pleasure, Mississippi Lane. Perhaps you might help Mr. Daniels see reason in this matter." "Mrs. Lane," Daisy corrected gently, withdrawing her hand. "And I think Mr. Daniels knows his own mind." Something flickered in Thornton's eyes. Recognition, perhaps. "Lane? Not Thomas Lane's widow?" Daisy stiffened. "You knew my husband?" "Knew of him," Thornton said, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "Denver business circles, you understand. Small world." He turned back to Wade. "Think on my offer, Daniels. Railroad won't wait forever, and neither will I. Good day to you both." They watched in silence as he climbed into his buckboard and drove away, dust rising behind the wheels. "How did he know Thomas?" Daisy asked, a familiar knot of dread forming in her stomach. Wade shook his head. "Don't know, but I don't trust that man as far as I could throw him." He placed a hand on the small of her back, guiding her toward the house. "Come on, let's get cleaned up and have some supper." Later, after a quiet meal of cold chicken and the apple pie Daisy had made that morning, they sat on the porch, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. The spring air was cool but not unpleasant, carrying the scent of distant rain. "Tell me about your life," Wade said suddenly. "The past 6 years. The real story, not the pretty version." Daisy wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "It's not a happy tale. I figured as much." His voice was gentle, "But I'd like to hear it all the same." So she told him about meeting Thomas Lane at a harvest dance, about his grand promises and her foolish dreams, about the hasty wedding and the gradual realization that she'd made a terrible mistake. Thomas had been charming in public but cold and controlling in private, his business dealings increasingly suspect as the years passed. There had been no children, a blessing in retrospect, though she'd wept over it at the time. "He hit you," Wade said when she reached the part about Thomas's increasingly violent temper. "It wasn't a question." "Yes." She touched her cheek unconsciously, remembering. "The first time was after a dinner party. I'd contradicted something he said about cattle prices. He waited until we were home, then backhanded me across the face. Said a wife's duty was to make her husband look good, not correct him in public." Wade's hands clenched into fists on his knees. "If he weren't already dead." "But he is," Daisy said softly. "And I'm free now. That's what matters." "Why didn't you leave him? Come back here." She laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. "Pride at first. I couldn't admit I'd made such a mistake, not after choosing him over." She trailed off, then continued. "Later, it was fear. Thomas made it clear what would happen if I tried to leave him." Wade was silent for a long moment. "I would have helped you," he finally said, "if you'd asked." "I know." Tears pricked at her eyes. "That's why I couldn't. I'd hurt you enough already." Wade shifted in his chair to face her, his expression earnest in the lamplight spilling from the window. "Daisy, I need to know something. Did you ever love him? Really love him?" The question cut to the heart of everything between them. Daisy chose her words carefully. "I thought I did at first, or I convinced myself I did, because it was easier than admitting I was running away from what scared me more, which was how much I loved you." The admission hung in the air between them, startling in its simple truth. How deeply I could be hurt if it went wrong. Wade reached across the space between their chairs, taking her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. "I never stopped loving you," he said, his voice low and intense. "Even when I wanted to. Even when I tried to hate you for leaving. Daisy's breath caught. Wade, I'm not asking for anything, he continued quickly. Just telling you where I stand. You need time. I understand that. It's not just time I need. She squeezed his hand. I need to prove to myself that I'm not the same foolish girl who ran away. That I can be worthy of a second chance. Wade smiled then, the first genuine smile she'd seen since her return. Daisy Lane, you've got nothing to prove to me. But if you need to prove something to yourself, I reckon that's a journey worth taking. They sat in companionable silence after that, hands still linked, watching as clouds scudded across the star-studded sky. It wasn't a declaration or a promise, but it felt like the beginning of something, a fragile bridge being rebuilt between two shores long separated. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. Daisy threw herself into the work of the ranch, rising before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the hands, spending her mornings on household tasks and her afternoons wherever she was needed in the garden, the barn, or out with the cattle. The physical labor was exhausting but satisfying, leaving her too tired to dwell on darker memories. Wade watched her with a mixture of admiration and concern, often insisting she rest when he thought she was pushing herself too hard. Their evenings were spent on the porch or by the fire, rebuilding their friendship through shared stories and comfortable silences. He never pushed for more, though Daisy sometimes caught him looking at her with such longing that it took her breath away. A week after her arrival, Daisy was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking out the window, she saw Wade riding in with the hands, all of them covered in dust from a long day working cattle. But there was something odd about the way Wade sat, his horse slightly slumped, one arm held stiffly against his side. She wiped her hands on her apron and hurried outside just as the men dismounted. Wade winced as he swung down from the saddle, and Daisy noticed a dark stain spreading on his shirt. What happened? She demanded, hurrying to his side. It's nothing, Wade said, though his pale face belied his words. Run in with a cranky longhorn. Caught me with his horn when I wasn't looking. He needs stitching up, madam, Hank said, concern evident in his weathered face. Bleeding something fierce earlier. Daisy took Wade's arm, guiding him toward the house. Inside. Now. To her surprise, he didn't argue, allowing her to lead him to the kitchen and ease him into a chair. She quickly gathered supplies: clean cloths, a basin of hot water, her sewing kit, and the bottle of whiskey Wade kept for medicinal purposes. Shirt off, she instructed, rolling up her sleeves. Wade attempted to unbutton his shirt, but grimaced in pain. Without hesitation, Daisy stepped forward, her fingers working the buttons loose until she could help him ease the blood-stained fabric off his shoulders. The wound was an angry gash about 4 inches long, just below his ribs on the right side. Could have been worse, she said, keeping her tone matter of fact despite the flutter of her heart at the sight of his bare chest. But it needs cleaning and stitching. Wade nodded, reaching for the whiskey. He took a long swallow, then handed the bottle to her. For your hands, he explained. Daisy poured a generous amount over her hands, then set about cleaning the wound. Wade hissed, but didn't flinch as she worked, washing away dirt and blood to reveal the clean edges of the gash. Ready? She asked, threading a needle with fine silk thread. Do your worst, he said with a tight smile. Daisy worked quickly, her stitches small and even. She'd had practice during her marriage. Thomas had frequently come home injured from various business dealings and refused to see a doctor. Wade was a far better patient, sitting perfectly still despite the pain she knew her needle was causing. There, she said finally, tying off the last stitch. Not my prettiest work, but it should hold. Thank you. Wade's voice was rough with pain or emotion, she couldn't tell which. His hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his chest. Don't know what I would have done without you here. Made a mess of it, most likely, she teased gently, trying to lighten the moment. But when her eyes met his, the intensity she found there stole her breath away. Daisy, he murmured, his hand tightening on hers. The sound of the door opening interrupted whatever he'd been about to say. They both looked up to see Hank standing in the doorway, hat in hand. Sorry to interrupt, the ranch hand said, looking uncomfortable. But there's a man here asking for Mrs. Lane. Says it's urgent. Daisy frowned, helping Wade into a clean shirt before following Hank outside. A tall, thin man in an expensive suit stood by the hitching post, examining the ranch with obvious disdain. "Mrs. Lane?" he inquired as she approached. "Yes, and you are?" "Harrison Wells, attorney at law." He handed her a folded document. "I represent the estate of Jacob Thornton. I'm here concerning a matter involving your late husband." Daisy's stomach clenched. "What about my husband? Perhaps we could speak privately?" Wells glanced meaningfully at Hank, who still hovered nearby. "Anything you have to say can be said right here," Daisy insisted, conscious of Wade coming to stand behind her. Wells cleared his throat. "Very well. Your husband, Mr. Thomas Lane, borrowed a considerable sum from my client shortly before his death. The debt remains unpaid." Daisy felt the blood drain from her face. "That's impossible. All debts were settled during probate." "Not this one." Wells produced another document. "This promissory note was signed 3 days before Mr. Lane's death, for the sum of $2,000, to be repaid within 6 months, with the Lane property in Denver serving as collateral." "The house was already sold to pay other debts," Daisy protested, scanning the document with growing horror. The signature did look like Thomas's, though something about it struck her as odd. "Indeed. Which leaves us in a difficult position." Wells's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. "However, Mr. Thornton is prepared to be generous. He's willing to consider the debt satisfied if you would persuade Mr. Daniels here to reconsider the railroad's offer for his eastern parcel." Understanding dawned, cold and clear. "This is extortion," she said quietly. Wells shrugged. "It's business, Mrs. Lane. My client can pursue this debt through the courts, which would be unpleasant for everyone. Or we can reach an amicable arrangement." "Let me see that." Wade stepped forward, holding out his hand for the promissory note. He studied it for a moment, then looked up with narrowed eyes. "This signature is forged." Wells stiffened. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Daniels." "It's the truth," Wade insisted. "I've seen Thomas Lane's signature on bills of sale for cattle. This isn't it." He turned to Daisy. "Did your husband sign with his right or left hand?" "Left," she answered immediately. He was proudly left-handed. Wade nodded grimly. "Look at the slant of these letters. They were written by a right-handed person trying to imitate a leftward slant." Wells snatched the paper back. "This is preposterous. The note will stand up in any court." "Will it?" Wade asked softly. "Especially when we tell the judge how Thornton tried to use it to coerce me into selling my land. How he sent you out here to threaten a widow with a fraudulent debt." The lawyer paled slightly. "No one is threatening anyone. Tell Thornton his scheme failed," Wade said, his voice dangerously calm. "And if he comes near Mrs. Lane or my property again, he'll answer to me." "Clear enough." Wells glanced between them, apparently reassessing the situation. Without another word, he turned on his heel, mounted his horse, and rode away. As soon as he was out of sight, Daisy's legs gave way. She would have fallen if Wade hadn't caught her, his strong arms coming around her despite his injured side. "It's all right," he murmured against her hair. "He's gone now." "I can't believe Thomas was involved with someone like Thornton," she whispered, trembling against him. "What kind of man did I marry?" Wade held her tighter. "A fool. Any man who had you and didn't treasure you was nothing but a damn fool." Daisy looked up at him then, seeing the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, the unwavering support. And something inside her shifted, the final wall crumbling away. Without stopping to think, she stretched up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. For a heartbeat, Wade remained perfectly still, as if afraid any movement would shatter the moment. Then his arms tightened around her, and he was kissing her back with 6 years of longing and regret and hope. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. "I've waited a long time to do that," Wade confessed, his voice rough. "I'm sorry it took me so long to come home," Daisy whispered. Wade cupped her face in his hands, his gaze serious. "Are you staying, Daisy? Really staying this time?" "Yes," she promised, her heart finally light for the first time in years. "I'm not running anymore. This is where I belong, where I always belonged." His answering smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then welcome home, Daisy Lane." As spring melted into summer, Daisy blossomed along with the land. The color returned to her cheeks, and the haunted look gradually faded from her eyes. She threw herself into ranch life with the enthusiasm of one who has been given a second chance, learning everything Wade would teach her about running the Double D. Word came that Thornton had left the territory under a cloud of suspicion, his dealings with the railroad called into question by several landowners who came forward with similar stories of coercion and fraudulent documents. The eastern parcel of the Double D remained intact, though the railroad eventually came through on a different route, bringing the promised prosperity without taking Wade's land. As for Wade and Daisy, they moved cautiously at first, rebuilding trust day by day. Their first kiss on that spring afternoon had been followed by many others, but Wade never pressed for more, understanding that Daisy needed time to heal from the wounds of her past. On a golden evening in late August, Wade took Daisy riding to a hilltop overlooking the entire ranch. The setting sun painted the landscape in shades of amber and rose, cattle dotting the distant pastures like shadows on the land. "I brought you here for a reason," Wade said as they dismounted, spreading a blanket on the ground. Daisy smiled, settling beside him. "Besides the view?" "Besides that." He took her hand, his expression suddenly serious. "Daisy, I've loved you since we were barely more than children. Loved you when you left, loved you while you were gone, love you now that you're back. I don't want to waste any more time." Her heart hammered against her ribs as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Inside was a simple gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Pa gave it to me before he died, said to save it for when I found the right woman." His blue eyes held hers, vulnerable and hopeful. "I've never had any doubt who that was." Tears blurred Daisy's vision. "Wade, I'm not asking because you need a home or protection," he said quickly. "I'm asking because I want to build a life with you. Wake up beside you every morning. Grow old watching you work this land. Have children who have your smile and your stubborn chin." He took a deep breath. "Daisy Lane, will you marry me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, her heart overflowing. "Yes, Wade Daniels. I will marry you." His smile was like sunrise as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms for a kiss that promised forever. They were married 2 weeks later in the small white church in town, with Mrs. Whitaker crying happily in the front pew and the ranch hands standing awkwardly in their Sunday best. Daisy wore a simple dress of pale blue silk, her one indulgence from the general store, with wildflowers in her hair and her mother's locket around her neck. As they spoke their vows before God and their neighbors, Daisy knew with absolute certainty that this time she had made the right choice. This was where she belonged, with this man, on this land, under this endless Colorado sky. The years that followed brought challenges, as all years do. Drought seasons that tested their resolve. A fire that nearly claimed the barn. The birth of their first child, a daughter with Wade's blue eyes and Daisy's determined spirit, followed 2 years later by twin boys who kept them running from sunup to sundown. But through it all, Daisy never again felt the urge to flee. She had found her home, her purpose, her love. And each night, as she lay in Wade's arms, she thanked whatever Providence had given her the courage to return to the ranch she had once fled and to the man whose door had never closed for her.